Hi, I'm Danny,
Hi, I'm Mel.
and we're the Sheehan sisters. If you haven't seen our faces before, we like to do commentary and podcast style videos on a bunch of topics we like to talk about.
So, as always, grab your coffee, tea, water, your beverage of choice, some snacks, get cozy because we have a lot to talk about today.
I put my coffee in the freezer for a few minutes, so
Nice.
it's a little bit icy.
We're filming later in the day than we usually do. And for you, are you.
I kind of don't want to tell them what time it is for me because I feel the judgment for drinking coffee this late. I feel you. I feel the judgment.
I'm laughing because I'm like, wait, holy shit, it's actually really late. You're gonna be up. You can be up all night, which you're usually up at night, regardless of drinking coffee.
I tried to explain to Mel because Mel and I are opposite in that regard, where Mel's more of a morning person and I thrive in the nights. I just wish we had a society where it's 24 hours, so that there's the night people and then the day people.
I feel like we're kind of already in that society because there are nighttime workers.
Definitely, but after COVID, a lot of places, okay, a lot of people they stopped having 24-hour stores.
That's true because a lot of people, maybe we'll do a poll, but from what I know, there's a lot of people who don't actually want to work nights. Like, do you want to be at work at night or do you just want to be awake at night?
I was telling Theo the other day, like, I prefer to have later shifts.
How late though? Like, you want to come home at midnight?
I would do overnight shifts at like Trader Joe's or something.
You say that now.
Why? I feel more productive at night as opposed to having, like, being forced to wake up at a certain time.
Right.
Granted, I guess we need vitamin D or something, so I should be in the sun. But you know, some of us, we're nocturnal, and I think we need to start doing more studies on that.
Well, you're not nocturnal because you can't see in the dark. So realistically,
But our eyes actually do start to adjust if you're in the dark long enough.
all right, you stay in the dark.
No, I'm always in the light. No, I'm always in the light. I'm always in the light.
I think it's fine if you can function at that time. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that I know a lot of people who don't want to work nights. Mostly, I think because of also the industry I'm in. Like, we want to just get home. Like, nobody wants to stay late. But I guess if your only job is an overnight shift, then you have the rest of the day to yourself.
Exactly.
But then you're not gonna. I guess you'll have to just conform your whole life around that, though. Like, your partner and your friends will have to have similar schedules because most people are out in the daytime.
Exactly. I want to be away from those people. Stop trying to force people into your boxes.
It's not. I'm not.
Not you, society. And this has to do with what we're talking about today. All my people that get me, comment down below. I need y'all to come back me up here.
All right. So today.
Do you see how she has to force her
No, I'm trying to. So you're misunderstanding me. Where I'm trying to understand you. I ask questions as not a line of like interrogation, and people always take this the wrong way. I ask questions to try to understand someone, but you're getting defensive. I'm not trying to question you as in you're wrong. I'm just questioning to understand.
I need my people to come through.
But do you get what I'm saying?
No.
So you're not trying to understand me. I'm trying to understand you, and you're just dismissive of my.
You're okay. We're gonna go into a debate right now because this is what happens when you and I tend to disagree.
But that's the thing too. I'm not trying to debate. I'm trying to understand. And this is what, guys, this, for people who understand me, this is my life. This is what I deal with in my life, that people always think I'm being argumentative and being defensive or trying to prove myself right when I'm just trying to understand someone. But that's another story, another topic for another day.
Yes.
But I'm not trying to have a debate or prove that what I'm thinking is right. I'm just trying to ask questions to understand who you are as a person.
We will definitely venture into that in another episode because I'm sure people will relate to you as well.
Yeah, we're both relatable. There's going to be people who agree with both of us on things. I am, again, not trying to spark debate or prove my line of thinking is correct.
Great. Do you want to tell them what we're talking about today?
We are talking about our book of the month for March, which is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Amazing read. What did you think?
Yeah, so I finished the book and I got on a call with Mel and I said, I'm mad. I'm mad. Margaret Atwood. Yeah. You know, I really thought that I was going to have a happy ending, you know, a redemption arc, if you will. And I guess in these dystopian worlds, there's just no hope, no light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, now we are going to debate. Now I am disagreeing. I think the ending was a realistic ending, and it's interesting because Danny and I both like to write. We've mentioned this before. I write short stories and poems, and I think in the past, Danny has pointed out that sometimes my endings are there's no happy ending in some of my the things that I write. So I think that's why I not enjoy that there's no happy ending, but I think again it's a more realistic ending where not everyone is gonna have a happy ending. Most of the people in this story don't have happy endings, and I know we wish that for the main character, but unfortunately, when there is
Oppression.
most people are actually not gonna have a happy ending. So I think it would be a false hope.
No, and I do agree with that. You know, I am somebody who, when I write, I don't always necessarily complete my story with a happy ending, but I have noticed that this is what audiences are looking for. Whenever I've submitted to contests and I've gotten feedback, people don't want unlikable characters. They want to be able to like identify the character and put them into a specific box, like this is a good person, this is the villain, and then they do want to see some sort of redemption or happy ending. So I agree with you. I do think it's realistic. I guess Margaret misled me. She misled me at a certain point where I was like, okay, I'm here. We're gonna get more into this, but I do want to show a video before we continue our debate about the book. But I just personally thought the ending was, from what I was reading, I thought it was going to lead to a happy ending or a revolution or some sort of fight, some sort of fight back. So I guess that's where I was disappointed. You know what? I'm not disappointed in the book as a whole. I think it's a great book, and I actually have a lot to talk about and a lot to take away from this story. And I'll explain further when we get into the nitty-gritty details why I felt like it was going to have a happier ending. But as of right now, I do want to show a quick short by the author Margaret Atwood.
So I was one of those teenagers who was reading Brave New World. I was reading 1984 about the time it was first published. First edition paperback, I still have it. Those sorts of books, Ray Bradbury, John Wyndham, I was mainlining those as a teenager, and I had always pretty much wanted to write one, but most of them were from the point of view of men. So I thought it would be interesting to take one of those dystopic societies and flip it and see what that felt like from the point of view of a woman in it.
So I wanted to show this short because there is a small spoiler in there of one of our upcoming book of the months. We're not going to reveal it, but take a guess. As well as Margaret Atwood mentioning Ray Bradbury, who we read at the start of this year for the month of January, where we read Fahrenheit 451. And Mel and I actually saw a lot of similarities, or definitely an influence of Ray Bradbury within The Handmaid's Tale. And we do have certain pages marked off where we feel Margaret was influenced by Fahrenheit 451, and we'll get into that shortly. I do want to ask you, Mel,
Okay.
did you feel like we were leading up to a happy ending?
Well, I've already read the book. So I mentioned this before, I'm rereading the book, but I did this with Fahrenheit 451 where I kind of rewrote the ending in my head. I knew in both books that both characters escaped, but in my head in the books they like reunited. Like for me, when I was rereading Fahrenheit 451, I thought that he reunited with Clarice and her uncle and like found a family. But that didn't actually happen, but I knew he escaped. And I did the same thing with this, where I thought her and Nick ran away together and it was confirmed that she was pregnant. But again, like I had rewritten things in my head from, I read this probably like 10 years ago. Crazy. But I did remember that she had escaped. I definitely, I guess I kind of did expect a happier ending because I rewrote it in my head.
Well, we don't know for certain that she escaped. It's opened for interpretation.
It is open for interpretation. However, I do believe, reading the historical notes at the end and the way it was written, it's supposed to be, this is her account of what happened, and the only way she would have been able to get her account out there is if she escaped to some extent.
Right. We know she was able to get her story out there. So there was a time where she released the story somehow, some way. We don't know for sure where she ended up.
Exactly. And I did want to say, like, before we fully get into the book, we did want to do this review a little different than the past because we tend to want to cover every aspect of the book. So, like, every single page and word and detail. And Danny and I decided to break it down into themes. So we're not going to specifically be, like, speaking in order. We're just going to be talking on the book as a whole, which is, I guess, kind of the point of a book review anyway.
Right, we are going to be jumping around, so we're not going to go in chronological order, but we've done that in our last two book reviews as well. Now we're trying to have some overall themes and then pinpoint where we saw those themes throughout the book.
Right, a little more structure.
We're always aiming for more structure.
So do you want to start with the theme of hope since we're already speaking on that?
Yeah, let's start with that theme. As the reader, I was hoping there was going to be an uprising amongst the handmaids, and we see them fighting against the regime, fighting against the center. I'll start there.
Right, of course we want the feminist uprise and the end of, where they're burning it all down and they're taking back their power. And this is something we were talking about in our last episode, or one of our last episodes, where right now I feel as though no one's doing enough, myself included. I'm like, why is there no rise up? And that's going to be a theme in this book as well, where people kind of slip into conformity and hope, to me, I don't know. I think I am on the other end where there was a lot of hopelessness in the book.
Okay. So I felt like our protagonist Offred, she was holding on to hope, right? Where we see those moments where she's either daydreaming about the past or she's revisiting her her husband in her, like, in the modern world, in the former life, Luke, and revisiting her daughter, and she's trying to create the scenarios of what could have become of them. And I feel like she also had this constant I feel like she constantly envisioned that this was all a dream, and she was hoping to just wake up one day and she's back to her previous life.
Right. Would you say she kind of slipped between hope and hopelessness? Because I feel as though right when she would have these daydreams of where her daughter might be or where Luke might be, she just as quickly went back to being like, well, that's useless for me to think of this, and that's not the reality I'm in.
Absolutely. And we do have another theme, just to intertwine it slightly here, of conformity versus rebellion. And I also feel like she was slipping in between those two as well, which can tie into her hope of rebelling, but then ultimately falling into that hopelessness of having to conform.
Right, and I think she also had a lot of daydreams of being more of a rebellious person where she's thinking of stabbing the commander or setting the house on fire.
Right, or even taking her own life as a form of protest.
Right.
And I want to start with, we were introduced to this phrase pretty early on when she's in her room and she discovers that it's, we researched this, and it's like, it's a made up language, but it's a mock, it's like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's supposed to be similar to Latin, but ultimately Margaret Atwood made this phrase up. So Offred, it's of, right? Like of, and then the man, Offred, of Warren.
I was saying off because there's two F's.
Right, but not all of them have two F's.
Oh, but for her name, I was saying off red. But I guess if they're not, I guess they're all supposed to be similar. But it's interesting that hers, I'm just now putting this together. Hers is off red and she's supposed to be wearing red. Anyway,
Ooh, I like
I
that.
just picked up on that.
Okay, we see you, Margaret Atwood. So the phrase she discovers in her cupboard, and I will certainly not be able to. I will certainly not be able to.
We'll put it on the screen. We'll put it on the screen. But if you've read the book, which we're hoping you did, you know the phrase.
I'll try to say it. Nolte de bastardes carborundorum. Sorry, that was horrible. But I'm gonna keep it in because you know what? We're here to we're trying here, okay? We're trying our best. So this phrase essentially translates to "don't let the bastards grind you down." But before we discover the meaning of the phrase, Offred doesn't know the meaning, but she knows that the woman who was previously in this room was able to etch this phrase into the cupboard, and she holds on to this phrase, and I personally think that's her form of hope as well, especially when she's in prayer circles, right? Instead of saying the prayers, sometimes she'll use this phrase and repeat that over and over again.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I was confused as to why was it once she found the meaning of the word, she kind of was upset about it, or like that's how I understood it, as she wasn't as hopeful, or she felt it didn't hold the same meaning, which I was confused about that.
No, that's a good point you bring up. I think because she didn't initially know what it meant, it could have represented anything for her, right? And it was a form of empowerment. So once she did find out the translation, maybe because it stemmed from like men making a mockery of the Latin language, or like making a joke, because that phrase was like written on a book with photos of pieces of art, right?
Right.
So she finds out the meaning through the commander. So I feel like once she found out it was just a bunch of men who were being stupid and making a mockery of the artwork, or whatever the reason behind it, they decide to write that, she was just let down that it wasn't as powerful as she felt like it was.
Right. Because the way I then interpreted it was the woman before her wrote that, and we know that the woman before her took her own life. And I feel as though it still fits. Don't let the bastards grind you down, as in the commander or his wife or just the regime as a whole, still don't let them grind you down to nothing. But then again, I'm like, is it still not that? I still believe that the woman before her wrote it, right? Do you still see it that way?
Yeah, the woman before her definitely wrote it in the cupboard.
And I feel like it is a way of taking back the power by taking a quote that the schoolboys were writing.
But Alfred does end up saying it one more time towards the end.
You're right.
I can't remember exactly where she said it. I think this was right before they come to get her, right? Yes, here, 225.
No, was it during the salvaging?
It was, yes.
And she says, did you want to read it?
No, you can read it.
So she repeats the quote one more time. This fat law of good it did her. Why fight? That will never do. Which, again, I feel like this hopelessness, but maybe
Right.
she, even though the woman before her didn't fight, she wanted the next woman to fight.
Exactly. I feel that way too. But even in this moment right here, I think she is battling that hope and hopelessness, where there is a part of her that wants to rebel, and then she goes right back to why fight? Why fight it?
Right. Which leads me to talk about our other theme of conformity, where there are a lot of quotes that allude to how easy it is for people to accept this as the new norm.
Absolutely. And I think that's something you mentioned at the start of this episode, where we talked about in what episode 12, where you were saying, well, we're not doing enough, right? So there are plenty of parts in this book that show you how easy it is to get a society to conform and to brainwash them and essentially give up their rights. Just go along with the system. Go along with the status quo. Oh, there's nothing we can do about it.
And that was a similar theme in Fahrenheit 451, where it was a slow change, and everyone is saying, well, why didn't I do more when it was happening? And now they feel as though it's too late. And we both marked page 56.
Yes, let me pull that up.
At the bottom of page 56, after reminiscing about her time with her best friend Moira during college, she says, "Is that how we lived then? But we lived as usual. Everyone does most of the time. Whatever is going on is as usual, even though this is as usual now. We lived as usual by ignoring. Ignoring isn't the same as ignorance. You have to work at it. Nothing, should I continue on or?
Yeah, I think this still correlates.
Nothing changes instantaneously. In a gradually heating bathtub, you'd be boiled to death before you knew it. There were stories in the newspaper, of course, corpse in ditches or the woods, bludgeoned to death or mutilated, interfered with, as they used to say, but they were about other women, and the men who did such things were other men. None of them were the men we knew. The newspaper stories were like dreams to us, bad dreams dreamt by others. How awful, we would say. And they were, but they were awful without being believable. They were too melodramatic. They had a dimension that was not the dimension of our lives. We were the people who were not in the papers. We lived in the black and white spaces at the edges of print. It gives us more freedom. We lived in the gaps between the stories. And
Right.
if that doesn't sum up society that today, where we're still reading this book as if it's some far off, impossible future that could happen.
Right, and how dismissive we as people can be because it's not happening to us. So we'll see something horrific in the news, and so many people do put that distance between reality and the horrors of what is happening before them because they aren't affected by it directly, or they'll choose to diminish what's going on in front of them and try to self-soothe and say, oh, well, that probably really didn't happen, or I'm sure they deserved it. Oh, they must have gotten this punishment for a reason. You know, so many people try to justify the horrors they're seeing before them. And there was another quote we wanted to point out that relates to this, right?
Yes.
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah.
Okay. There's another quote on page 271 that correlates to this message. Towards the bottom, Offred is saying, some days I was more rational. I did not put it to myself in terms of love. I said, I have made a life for myself here, of a sort. That must have been what the settlers' wives thought, and women who survived wars, if they still had a man. Humanity is so adaptable, my mother would say. Truly amazing what people can get used to as long as there are a few compensations.
And this was another thing I was talking about in episode 12, where people are afraid to lose their things, I would say, where, well, I have these comfortable attachments, so I don't want to disrupt that. And and again, putting that distance between ourselves and what's actually happening in the world.
Absolutely.
And I think this was a good place to start as far as themes, the hope and the conformity, because it shows how this world in particular that Margaret Atwood's creating leads to the dystopia.
Right, and I did want to get into some of the women in the story that represent the rebellion, right? The rebellious woman. And I do think her mother is a representation of rebellion, how she describes her. She seems like she's a free spirit. She even seems like she's on the verge of immaturity, right? It kind of seems like Offred, right? Because we don't know what her real name was. Offred was more of the adult or responsible one in their dynamic.
Right.
There's different parts throughout the book where we see her mother's personality, right? She was part of the marches to protest, and there's even a part on page 180 that I wanted to read where her mother calls her prude. Do you remember this?
Yes.
Also, Nala is next to me snoring. If this gets picked up in the audio, I'm sorry. Okay. So on page 180, the mother has her friends over and they're talking about the protest, and from what we could understand, it seems like her mother and her mother's friends are part of the resistance, right? They do want to empower women.
Right. I agree. I would say her mother and her friends are feminist. Margaret Atwood wrote this in the early 80s, which is kind of a time where there's a rise of the feminine movement. And I feel like that's what her mother was kind of mirrored after and written after, the women at that time who were rebelling against the system, rebelling against the patriarchy.
Absolutely. So at the bottom of page 180, Offred says, I went into my bedroom to be out of their way. They were talking too much and too loudly. They ignored me and I resented them. My mother and her rowdy friends. I didn't see why she had to dress that way, in overalls, as if she were young, or to swear so much. You're such a prude, she would say to me, in a tone of voice that was, on the whole, pleased. She liked being more outrageous than I was, more rebellious. Adolescents are always such prudes. And then on the next page at the top, the protagonist says, part of my disapproval was that, I'm sure, perfunctory routine. But also I wanted from her a life more ceremonious, less subject to makeshift and decampment.
I understood some of the frustration she had towards her mother, where she felt like she wasn't being a mother, but I also did feel as though Offred's character did come across in many ways complacent and not a prude. I don't want to use that word, but judgmental, definitely.
Right, but do you think that's just a product of her being raised by someone so free-spirited, where she almost felt like she wanted more of a quote-unquote traditional mother who baked, and she even mentions about her, like, Offred's father, and she says her father wasn't up to fatherhood. And I'll read that in just a moment, but maybe Offred wanted a more traditional household where her parents were together, and her mother wasn't such a free spirit and wasn't out on the streets protesting and marching, and she even comments on how she's dressed, right?
Right, and I just think there's so much irony within that, which of course is intentional, because her mother is fighting for her daughter in a way, but she doesn't see it the same. But I understand wanting to have that motherly figure.
Right, and even on page 81, there's a part at the top where she says, no mother is ever completely a child's idea of what a mother should be. And I suppose it works the other way around as well.
And then she does end up saying right after that too, I wish she were here so I could tell her I finally know this. So I think, again, it took her being in this new world to understand her mother a little better.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
But interestingly enough, and I know we want to get to another character as well, is Moira, who I feel parallels her mother, parallels Offred's mother with the rebellious attitude. And I think it's interesting that she surrounded herself with someone so similar to her mother.
This is something we actually talked about off camera recently.
Do any of you feel as though you befriend people that remind you of your family, for better or for worse, specifically your mother or father?
Let us know. And I'm sure there's the psychology behind that of, like, you gravitate towards what you're used to and what your upbringings were.
Right.
But I digress. I did want to turn quickly to page 121 while we're still talking about her mother.
Okay.
We never find out her mother's name, right?
I don't think so.
I find that interesting because the names are important in this book, or rather, they don't, in their society, right? Once the women are indoctrinated into this new society, this new regime, their names are taken away from them. So they don't want them to have an importance attached to their name. They're just the property of the man.
Right. I think that was her form of protection and also for herself, where she wanted to keep something for herself and not revealing her name. Because again, this I think is supposed to be read as an account of hers to be left for people who come after her.
To turn to page 121, at the top, her mother says, "Not that your father wasn't a nice guy and all, but he wasn't up to fatherhood. Not that I expected it of him. Just do the job, then you can bugger off," I said. "I make a decent salary, I can afford daycare." So he went to the coast and sent Christmas cards. You see, I feel like that's another example of her not having these traditional values where she's like, I don't need a man. I have my own money. I can raise the child on my own.
I think it's interesting because she goes on to say, there's something missing in them, even the nice ones. It's like they're permanently absent-minded, like they can't quite remember who they are. And then she also goes on to say, they're better at fixing cars and playing football, just what we need for the improvement of the human race, right? And I love this whole take she had on men because I feel like it's similar to things we were saying in our other. So we're going to be posting 2 videos back to back, this video, and also we did a video talking about the documentary The Manosphere, which I think is just so beautifully poetic that these 2 videos are back to back. I'm not sure which one we're going to be posting first, but I feel this in my soul because I felt as though when I was watching that documentary, just the blank stare that was kind of going on behind a lot of them. And again, the things that they feel are important to society, which again, I feel like is shown throughout this book where the pressure of the society is put onto the women.
Right. And of course, the mother is a representation of the, she's the antithesis, right, of the society they want to create and the role they want women to play. Before we move on to another character, I do want to wrap up one more page that references her mother, and this is on 127. "Mother, I think, wherever you may be. Can you hear me? You wanted a woman's culture. Well, now there is one. It isn't what you meant, but it exists. Be thankful for small mercies." So I do feel like this moment we have offered battling between hopelessness and hope because she's remembering her mother and her mother's desire to empower other women and to build a more feminist society. But ultimately, Offred is now in a society that is supposed to be a society built where women are centered.
It gives the illusion.
An illusion, absolutely. And she's almost being petty by saying be thankful for small merceries, as though here is a society where women are centered, but it's not the one you wanted it to be.
Right, I did feel resentment in that quote when she was saying it. Again, she's still holding that hostility towards her mother. And I think another character, which I think we want to move on to the same character, who holds a lot of hope, is her best friend Moira.
Absolutely. What did you think of Moira?
I loved her. She's A great character. I agree with a lot of things Moira would be saying because, again, I'm someone who's very outspoken.
Absolutely. I was envisioning women I've met throughout my life, and even myself. I've seen women I've met throughout my life in that character and seen myself in that character as well.
To the ladies out there and non-ladies, have a friend like Moira. You need a friend like Moira in your life. So last year, Danny and I read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and I also see some parallels within that book too, but the character of Moira reminded me a little bit of the character Doreen, which again, just a friend that's a little more extroverted and out there and willing to do crazy things. I just wanted to note that. But
Of course, and I feel like we still see that best friend or that woman character throughout films.
yes,
The edgy badass who helps their best friend get out of their comfort zone.
exactly. That's the point I was trying to get to. And I think there's a part of Moira that we all want to have, where there's times where they're in the center and Moira keeps trying to break out, and there are times where I'm reading it and I'm thinking, I want that to be me. I'm like, okay, is that what I would do in this situation? Like, would I try to find a way to get out of there? What did you think of this character?
Yeah, I agree. I really liked Moira. She was not having it. She was like, this place is a hellhole, and we need to find a way out. And she has two attempts to escape. The first one fails, and then we see the extent of violence they will impose upon these women, right, to teach all of them a lesson. You are not allowed to escape. This is your role, and you have to follow the order. You have to follow the rules. And then the second attempt, she does find a way to escape.
Right, and I just wanted to note how in the first attempt they bring her back to show the other women. They don't just take her life. They torture her and then bring her back to show the other women, don't do this. Again, Moira is a resilient character, so she does, like you said, make the second attempt and escapes. And it's not until later on in the story where Offred and Moira are reunited where she finally fully knows what happened.
Right, and we get to learn what skills Moira does have, right? Because she uses a piece of the toilet to threaten Aunt Elizabeth and is able to swap clothes with Aunt Elizabeth so that she can walk right out of there.
Right, and then she finds other people who are part of the resistance, which there will always be a resistance happening. Again, that's the hope. But ultimately, it doesn't really work out for Moira because she gets caught and put back into the society.
Right, and I do think it's purposeful, right? You know, Margaret Atwood is trying to show just how dangerous this regime is and just how dangerous your rights can be stripped away from you. Do you know what's interesting though? I feel like where Moira ended up, it's still in a way rebellious.
I think it gives, again, the illusion of that, where, again, they're giving these false sense of freedoms. And like the quote we mentioned earlier, where there's like the few compensations that are given.
Right. Right. She's trying to choose the lesser of the two evils.
Right, but ultimately, our favorite word, she, to me it's almost the same, because both her and Offred are forced to engage with these men unwillingly.
Right.
So they're going through the same kind of motions in a way.
No, I understand that. She does become numb in a way,
Right.
but she's trying to hold on to any sort of win she can grasp being in this new environment, which is the club where the men create it, because of course in this society it's still a patriarchy. They are, like you said, giving an illusion that it's a women-centered culture when really it's still catering to the man. And they want to create the club where they have the prostitutes, the sex workers. The men still have their vices, so the women in the club are still under the man's control and catering to his will. But I feel like Moira is choosing the wins she can get, right? The drinking, the smoking, those vices that she can partake in, and in her mind is trying to rationalize what she's compromising.
Right. But then again, she got caught the second time, and that's how she got brought back to work in the club. Because again, it's either that or death, almost, basically. Like, what is,
Right.
again, picking the lesser of two evils and picking to live, even if it's in this terrible world, rather than to not live. Which again is the same moral dilemma that Offred deals with throughout the book.
Alfred tells us she doesn't know what happened to Moira. She doesn't know what became of her after she saw her that night at the club. So I feel like there's this existence of hope to Moira's ending, right? Where we can create our own idea of what happened to Moira. Maybe she did find a way to escape for another time. Well, oh, you know what I wanted to bring up? That's what I wanted to bring up. It's coming to me now. Where Offred, she's holding on to hope, where she is envisioning that Moira ends up burning down the club, right?
Which I feel, again, is the hope that the readers are having, and you are having, where you're like, okay, and where's the full rebellion? And I think this ties into yet another theme of the book, of the women being pitted against each other, where they could in some way come together, where the wife and Offred and the other women and the aunts, if they all could just come together as women and understand each other, there could be an uprising, right?
Right. And choosing to band together within the sisterhood, instead of the women who are conforming to the society that have quote unquote power, like the wives and the aunts. I feel like some of them have the same ideologies where they do want women to be traditional, but there's also a part of them that is comfortable with this position because they are allotted a certain amount of power, so they can still have that superiority.
Right, exactly. And she talks about that in a part of the book too, about the aunts, where it's, did they get into this position because they are believers, or did they take this position because it was better than going to the colonies, which we learned that the colonies is where they send a lot of people who don't fit into the structure of their society, and we find out that they're kind of just doing all of the other labors that happen, where they're farming and they're cleaning up the dead bodies, and they're doing all the work that obviously none of the higher powers want to partake in.
Right, and we learned that Alfred's mother is in the colonies. And I didn't get to read this part when we were talking about her mother, but I think this is a good place to interject this part of the book on page 122. Where Alfred says, I admired my mother in some ways, although things between us were never easy. She expected too much from me, I felt. She expected me to be, sorry. She expected me to vindicate her life for her and the choices she made. I didn't want to live my life on her terms. I didn't want to be the model offspring, the incarnation of her ideas. We used to fight about that. I am not your justification for existence, I said to her once. I want her back. I want everything back the way it was. But there is no point to it, this wanting.
Right, and I think a lot of us can relate to not living up to what our parents want, or having our parents push their own ideals and dreams onto us.
Absolutely. And she's now in a place in her life where, and I wanted to bring this up later on as well, where she's thinking about all these things she had in her former life, like even the fights with Luke, and she's realizing it really wasn't that bad, and she took it for granted. And I think she's learning she took her relationship with her mother for granted, and took what her mother represented and what she stood for granted. And I do want to ask you, while we're talking about the women within the center who are of a hierarchy. That's a tongue twister right there. So we haven't spoken about this character, but this is Offred's partner. Each handmaid needs to have a partner to go shopping with, and whenever they are given a pass to walk throughout the neighborhood, they have to have a partner. And Offred's partner is Off Glen, right? And we learned that Off Glen is not a true believer, and she actually has a lot of intel and has gathered a significant amount of information. And I guess I'm wondering, do you think there was someone in a higher status, like maybe one of the aunts or maybe one of the wives, that was releasing information?
Well, I think, and it's mentioned throughout the book too, even with the characters Rita and Cora, who we haven't spoken much about, where there's still gossiping, you could say, that takes place. And even with the wives themselves, where one thing women are always going to do is we're going to talk. So I feel as though that's something that is still happening. And I once again, Offred there's another woman in her life who's rebellious. So I also like that as well, where, okay, here's your partner who's once again someone who's not so similar to her mother and Moira, but someone who is still trying to fight the system. But I definitely think, like we mentioned earlier, there's the resistance. There's probably more people in that community and in this society that, I don't know how to phrase it, but they are in some way resisting and they are in some way resisting and rebelling, even if that is just through gossiping.
Right. And I do think that is women's strength, right? Where they are able to pass information to one another. And I'm sure there, this is what Margaret Atwood was alluding to, that there are other women, there are other handmaids who are displaying a form of resistance, but at the same time still conforming. So it's this inner struggle, right, where they'll take little steps to try to get a movement going, or at least that's what I believe, especially when we see Glenn saying, oh, there's more of us, we can help you get out of here. So we do know that there is some resistance and there is a movement happening. We do see Glenn offer. I cannot do Glenn offer Offred. I can't. We do see Glenn mention that there's a way out. So there is some resistance going on, and it seems that she has helped some handmaids get out of there, right?
Right, because she does mention to her, we can get you out, and there's more of us, and alludes to this rebellion that's taking place. And even at the end, we hope to believe that Nick was even part of this rebellion, because he mentions Mayday to her, and it's kind of, again, alluded that the people that come to get her are good people and she's going to be safe.
Yes, you know what? I completely bypassed that. I got so angry that I bypassed Nick using the code, the password.
That's why I was so confused why you were so angry, because I was like, I think it's saying there's hope that she got out.
Okay, that's making me feel better. I was so mad when I started seeing Offred be submissive, and she started to dismiss Glenn's help, and she started to ignore her and drown her out, and was like, okay, I'll just accept my place in this society, and I'll accept that I now have this relationship with Nick, and that'll be good enough for me.
And we've all seen it happen before to a friend who gets in a relationship or gets hypnotized by a man. But this teeters between the conformity and the rebellion, where her being with Nick was her own form of rebellion, because she could have died if she got caught. She could have got killed if she got caught. So she's conforming to an extent, I would say.
Take a hit every time we say conform and rebel.
But also, okay, but speaking about the teetering between both, even Serena Joy, the wife of the commander, is the one who gets the relationship between her and Nick started, even though she's not well aware if it continues, but she even cheats herself, and the other wives cheat, where they want their handmaid to get pregnant, so they'll have someone else do it, because most of them know that their husbands are too old or sterile or whatever it may be, even though, again, in this world, nothing is the man's fault and everything is put onto the women, for better or for worse.
Right. But do you think that's their own form of oppression on the men? Not oppression, but they're just viewing like, oh yeah, any old sperm essentially will do. It doesn't need to be the commander's.
Right, because in this society, all that matters is reproduction, which is really strange to me. It's strange to me, even though it still happens in today's world and in present day. But again, one of the themes we wrote down was the control of women and their reproductive organs, which is, again, still happening. And sorry, what was your question? I'm starting to lose it. I don't know why.
Do you feel like it's their way to invalidate the importance of the man, right? Because they don't care which man it is. As long as they're able to reproduce, then that'll be sufficient to them. So they're also they're turning the tables by objectifying the man and focusing solely on his abilities.
I don't see it that way, just because again they're conforming to the society as a whole of, I need to show that my household can reproduce. So they want their handmaid to get pregnant so they have the baby, and that shows some form of status. And then it also gets the handmaid out of their house because it also goes back to the jealousy and competition.
Right, but they don't necessarily care if the baby is the husband's.
Right. I think it also shows that they don't care so much. I think, okay, I guess I see what you're saying. I think it shows that they don't agree fully with the system, and that they realize there are flaws in the system, because again, Serena mentions how she doesn't think her husband is capable of
Right.
anymore, of being able to impregnate Offred. But I still don't see it as taking back any kind of power, because these women, the handmaids, still are being forced to sleep with some other man. And it's like, yeah, in her case, in Offred's case, maybe she actually got someone that she finds attractive and continues to have this love affair with. But for the other women, they're being forced with who knows who they're being forced with. Like in the beginning, when she went to the doctor, one of the doctors was like, I'll help you out.
Yes, I did want to talk about this. So the creepy doctor who was trying to sexually assault.
Well, then that's the thing too, where even Offred says it's not our word, because again, this is just the society that they've created, where it's not even, it's just what it is, basically, sadly enough.
Right, which we know is just another form of brainwashing.
Which then they contradict that towards the end at the salvaging, where they throw a man out in the pit because he committed sexual assault, which also confused me.
Right, but what I thought happened there, so he starts to say, I didn't.
Right, and Offglen says that that's not the truth, but I'm just saying the fact that they even would care if it were. You get what I'm saying?
Right. So I think the regime, right, they're using the women's anger and hatred and weaponizing that to get rid of people they want to get rid of. So they'll make a claim that this man committed something illegal, but we don't really know the truth.
Right, but I'm just saying there's so much irony in the fact that they're trying to say this is what he committed, when I feel as though that's being committed constantly. Like, none of these women are she does say, Offred does say, she consents. Again, it's a double-edged sword, because again, that's just the society they've created.
Right, she really doesn't have consent. She doesn't have a choice. So I did want to talk about the ceremony.
Okay.
As I'm reading the book, right, I'm like, okay, so we're going to learn how they're inseminating the women. And I was disgusted when I got up to the ceremony, because if their main goal is to reproduce, then they can do that in a way that doesn't include the intercourse.
Of course, yeah.
So again, it's still tailored towards pleasing men, but even the men are not supposed to see that as pleasure, right? They're just supposed to view it as transactional.
Right,
Sure.
which again is why the men still have their pleasures elsewhere with the club. So much of the book is the characters contradicting each other, and ultimately it doesn't seem like any of them really even want this societal structure that's taken place.
Isn't it creepy that they created the club because they're drawn to something forbidden and taboo? It's like, no, even though they are getting quote unquote pleasure, they still are desiring something forbidden, right? Surrounding a woman.
Right. I think there's, again, more irony where there's the conversation between her and the commander. So she starts to have an affair, quote unquote, with the commander, which, again, a lot of these things, the vices that men have, still exist within this world. And he says to her, oh, we made it easier for you. We made a better life for the women by banning all of these things from them, saying, oh, you guys would get all this work done and go on all these dates, and people, it put you all down. But like you said, they're still creating this club that, and you help me out here.
They still want to be surrounded by women who are getting dressed up and wearing makeup and presented a certain way.
And it's interesting enough because he also goes on to tell her, oh, the men have nothing.
Right.
And I just,
Which does that not relate to our manosphere commentary about the men saying they're not born with value?
you created this world. This is your creation. You created, this world was created by you, for you, and you're still not happy with it.
Still not happy, still seeking to exploit women in other ways.
Has several women in the house who cook, clean, serve him. Like it just.
Right, and they even say at one point, oh, we made it easier for you. We split up all these chores and all these roles that a woman should have in the household. We split it up amongst multiple women. This is supposed to be an easier life for you.
Right, again, giving the illusion, this false sense of control from the women, or to the women.
Right, and we learned that the commander has all of these banned items in his office. He has all these illegal items, right? Like when you were mentioning the things, right? We all have things, right? He's still holding on to them. The magazines, the Scrabble, the cigarettes, the liquor.
Right, and again, because he's in a position of power, once again, the powerful men are still allowed to have all of these things and then go to the clubs, and they're still allowed to partake in all the things that are supposedly forbidden.
Right. Right. I thought this was outlawed for everyone, but they still managed to find a way. Still created a patriarchy within this quote unquote women-centered culture. Okay. And I do want to go back to the women being pitted against one another, because we see the jealousy between the wife and the handmaid, and even throughout the ceremony, right, where the wife needs to be involved. How did you feel reading about the ceremony? It disturbed me. I'm not going to lie.
The ceremony where they're incubating, or the ceremony of the actual pregnancy?
Oh, we can talk about both of them. No, the when they give birth, that's the ritual, but the
Ceremony, I obviously did not like that scene. Felt very uncomfortable with it, and I think it's meant to make you feel uncomfortable.
Right, and then the wives who aren't able to get pregnant, they have this resentment towards the handmaid. And then later we learn that the wife, because she is of higher status, she takes on like the pregnancy symptoms, and she's even the one who gets to immediately hold the baby after birth and name the baby. You see, you know that there is going to be that resentment between the two of them, the handmaid and the wife, because now the wife is raising the handmaid's baby. And even to mention Rita and Cora, they have their resentment towards the handmaids because they feel like well, Rita specifically, right? Where she's mean to Offred, and it's almost as though she blames Offred for the society that they're in.
Right. I wish we got to explore the character of Rita more and understand the anger. I don't know if it's because I guess technically Offred doesn't have to do as much work as she does. She gets to leave the house and go on the walk to do the grocery shopping, but other than that, she's not given too much responsibility.
We have on page 47, there's an exchange between Rita and Offred. After Offred comes back from shopping and picks up the groceries, there's a moment where Rita's being grumpy towards her. And I'm sorry, I'm looking for it. Okay, here it is. So Offred says she's thinking she could have done better herself. She would rather do the shopping, get exactly what she wants. She envies me the walk. In this house, we all envy each other something.
Right, which relates. Sorry, and I'll let you go.
No, and that's something you mentioned, that there is something that Offred does or has that Rita wants, and then we see that throughout all the women in the house within the society, right? The wife wishes she could have the baby, wishes she could get pregnant and carry the baby, and then the handmaid wishes that she had more status and freedom.
Of course, all of the women ultimately want the same thing, which is freedom.
Right.
And I just wanted to bring it back because I found the page where the commander says that the men have nothing. So I just wanted to compare the two, how they make it seem as though the women have it all, and they do, and they do that till this day. We're now on page 210. He says the main problem was with the men. There was nothing for them anymore. Nothing, I say, but there was nothing for them to do, he says. They could make money, I say, a little nastily. Right now, I'm not afraid of him. It's hard to be afraid of a man who's sitting watching you put on hand lotion. This lack of fear is dangerous. It's not enough, he says. It's too abstract. I mean, there was nothing for them to do with a woman. Oh, sorry. There was nothing for them to do with women. What do you mean, I say? What about all the porny corners? It was all over the place. They even had it motorized. I'm not talking about sex, he says. That was part of it. The sex was too easy. Anyone could just buy it. There was nothing to work for, nothing to fight for. We have the stats from that time. You know what they were complaining about the most? Inability to feel. Men were turning off on sex even. Men were turning off on sex even. They were turning off on marriage. Do they feel now, I say? Yes, he says, looking at me. They do. I just think it's interesting that a lot of what he's saying in this so-called dystopian world is a lot of what we heard when we were watching the Manosphere documentary and what we hear from men today, where, again, they're ultimately mad at the society and the structures that were created by men. They're saying sex became too easy, and they, again, blame that on the woman when it's the men who are consuming the porn and all of that. And that's something Danny and I were talking about too, where we see in a flashback Offred's mother and her friends are burning the porn magazines, because there's always this double-edged sword of allowing the women to have that freedom over their body and their choice, but then resenting the men for wanting that and feeding into it. And I think the men have that as well, but for some reason we come to the conclusion that it's the fault of the woman.
Right, and he also says that they weren't feeling, even when it comes to sex. But then that's what they're doing now as commanders, because they're not supposed to feel anything when they have that transaction with the handmaid. So that's why they created the club. So they still end up creating that same society just through loopholes.
And there are the religious people out there, which religion is another theme throughout the book, where they feel that sex is only used for reproduction. So again, just a lot of contradictions, and even saying how money is just abstract, it means nothing. But again, they're the ones that created that structure.
Right, and she's asking him if they feel now, and he says yes. But he also mentioned that he no longer has a connection to his wife and that she rarely talks to him.
Well, it says, yes, he says, looking at me. So again, there's, because within this world, the affairs still exist where men are looking outside of their own relationships because they don't know how to communicate with their wives and their partners about how they're feeling.
Right, and still gravitating towards something forbidden.
Right.
To stimulate them.
Right. It's just, it's very interesting. Oh, so I think it's interesting that she brought up how they can make money, because in a flashback, we see that one of the first things that happened when this new regime took over was the firing of women, and she lost her job and she lost access to her bank account, and it was only the men that were allowed to have the money.
Yes.
Again, that was another point I wanted to bring up too, the complacency of the men at that time who weren't fighting back or doing anything because they still had some sort of control where they're like, well, I can still have the money. And Luke, her husband, even turns and says to her, well, I'll take care of you. Which I think, in my opinion, I think Luke is dead now. I think he got either, maybe he's dead or maybe he got thrown to the colonies. But it's just interesting that he didn't have the same amount of anger that she did when that happened. Because he thinks maybe, oh, everything's going to be okay, or I'm going to still be able to fix it, when he is not someone of status. So he's going to get tossed away eventually. And again, the complacency of it, where everyone thinks that they're going to be okay until it happens to them.
Right. That's on page 179 if we want to read a little bit of that dialogue she has with Nick.
Luke.
Sorry. With Luke. I say Nick because in my opinion, I feel like Nick became a representation of Luke. So he says it's only a job. Which again, downplaying the situation and diminishing the significance of what just happened. These women are losing their rights. They're not allowed to work. And he gives such a passive response. Oh, it's only a job. And she goes, I guess you get all my money, I said. And I'm not even dead. I was trying for a joke, but it came out sounding macabre. Hush, he said. You know I'll always take care of you. So she mentions at the bottom of 179, I remembered something I seen and hadn't noticed at the time. It wasn't the army, it was some other army. And then on the next page, she says, there were marches, of course, a lot of women and some men, but they were smaller than you might have thought. I guess people were scared. And when it was known that the police or the army or whoever they were would open fire almost as soon as any of the marches even started, the marches stopped. A few things were blown up, post offices, subway stations, but you couldn't even be sure who was doing it. It could have been the army to justify the computer searches and the other ones, the door-to-doors. And a little bit further down, she says, I didn't know many of the neighbors, and when we met outside on the street, we were careful to exchange nothing more than the ordinary greetings. Nobody wanted to be reported for disloyalty. And I feel like this showcases the complacency that we mentioned earlier. People started feeling frightened, and slowly there were no more protests because people didn't want to die. And this is what we were talking about in our last episode, right? Where we're saying, so many of us feel like we want to do more, but we're scared, right? They want us to be fearful of what can happen to us and what can happen to our life.
Right, and that's the choice a lot of these characters have to make. It's rebel. If I rebel, I could die. And is it worth it? Or should I just be complacent and deal with the life that I'm given? And going off of that, another parallel that I see to today's world is on 169.
And I just want to remark, this is how it starts, right? And this is why people say, yeah, it may not be happening to you now, but it's going to. Oh, I'm not going to concern myself because this horrific act or this new law has nothing to do with me. Oh, it's not stripping my right away, so I don't need to worry. But the point is, it starts somewhere and then it escalates.
Right, which is why I was also pointing out in one of our last episodes about the small, like you were saying, where you got to take small steps. But as much as we get to make small steps to good, the other side, the evil side, is taking small steps of their own or even larger steps of their own. So that's the scary part, where we're kind of at the beginning of the dystopia here in America, when there are plenty of other countries and plenty of other people, even in America, who are already living this life, which okay, so that's what I want to point out on page 169.
Yes.
So this was after the conversation her and Offglen have, where they realize that they're both not true believers, and they're out on their grocery shop. They're out grocery shopping. At the bottom of the page of 169, something is happening. There's a commotion, a flurry among the shoals of cars. Some are pulling over to the side as if to get out of the way. I look up quickly. It's a black van with the white winged eye on the side. It doesn't have the siren on, but the other cars avoid it anyway. It cruises slowly along the street as if looking for something. Shark on the prowl. And I just want to skip down a little. Right in front of us, the van pulls up. Two eyes in gray suits leap from the opening double doors at the back. They grab a man who is walking along, a man with a briefcase, an ordinary-looking man, slam him back against the back side of the van. He's there a moment, splayed out against the metal, as if stuck to it. Then one of the eyes moves in on him, does something sharp and brutal that doubles him over into a limp cloth bundle. They pick him up and heave him into the back of the van like a sack of mail. Then they are also inside and doors are closed and the van moves on. It's over in seconds, and the traffic on the street resumes as if nothing has happened. And what I feel is relief. It wasn't me. And that just sounded all too familiar. It sounds exactly like the ICE raids that are happening right now. Car pulls up, grabs somebody, throws them in the back of a car. And that's it. And everyone just kind of moves on about their day. And like at the most we do now is film it.
Right. And even thinking about their society, right? Because they're surrounded by this large wall. And there was one point where Alfred was explaining that some of the people outside of the center aren't fully aware what's going on within. And I feel like that's happening in 2026, right? Where we have these encampments. We don't know where ICE is taking these people and what they're doing to them.
Right, and that's even said in the beginning where Moira escapes and she's looking for someone who's part of the resistance, and she was dressed as one of the ants, as we mentioned, and she says how the house she goes up to, they don't even know about the ants fully, or about the Red Center, or about what's fully taking place, because at this point in time, in the beginning, again, it's the small steps that they're taking to slowly get society into the structure that they want.
Right. Right. They're still integrating different parts of this world, right? This country, let's say, to fully conform to the eyes, which we haven't talked about. And this could be another example of a sector that the government creates, like we're seeing in 2026, right? Where they're overseeing, they're controlling, they're creating agendas, they're stripping rights away, they're getting everyone to follow orders and to conform, and taking away power and individualism. And that even goes into our overall theme of religion, right? Where we still see this, where there's this, one religion that wants to create nationalism and impose actually this religion onto everyone.
Right, and I have two more pages I want to point out. To go off of the religious quote, on page 174, again, when she's flashing back to all of this happening, so it says, it was after the catastrophe when they shot the president and machine gunned the Congress, and the army declared a state of emergency. They blamed it on the Islamic fanatics at the time. More irony in that, because again, that's still what's happening in today's society, what's currently happening right now in our world. But, and then again, like wanting the one religion to take over, how they're like, oh, these Islamic fanatics, when in reality it's the Christian fanatics that are taking over and pushing their ideals onto people.
And to go off of that, I want to turn to, from pages 119 through 123, we see that the handmaids are being forced to watch certain films, right? And this is part of the brainwashing. And we didn't get to mention the unwomen, which the aunts call them. And these are women who are not conforming, they're not following their womanly duties, right? Their sole purpose is to reproduce and to be the childbearer, and they call them godless. They're trying to instill these beliefs and these values, and you see that on 120, where there's these words, these signs in the film, which technically the handmaids are not allowed to read. It's illegal for them to read or write. But they slipped in these signs, right, to brainwash them. And it says, freedom to choose, every baby a wanted baby, recapture our bodies. Do you believe a woman's place is on the kitchen table? Under the last sign, there's a line drawing of a woman's body lying on a table, blood dripping out of it. So it's just them continue this propaganda, right, where they're showing, this was like during the protests, right, where these were women who were trying to speak up for women's rights and empower them. Before we move on from our theme of religion, I did want to turn to page 24. And we have Aunt Lydia, where she's saying, at the bottom of page 24, there is more than one kind of freedom, said Aunt Lydia. Freedom to and freedom from. In the days of anarchy, it was freedom to. Now you are being given freedom from. Don't underrate it.
Right, and I feel like, again, that goes along with the theme of women having to be modest because it's protecting them from the men, but then as we see, these men are still in control and having their nights out.
Absolutely. And it's still, the society is still under the guise of we're doing what's best for you. And this is another form of freedom where you aren't subjected to being harassed on the street.
Right. And that actually goes perfectly with what I want to bring up, because it's still within the form, it's still within the theme of religion on page 28, so not too far away. I don't know if I'm going to read the quote, but in this scene, Offred is walking through the market and there's tourists there, which I was very confused by that part, because they're still allowing tourists to come into this sector, even though there's a wall and other people aren't allowed.
Well, I feel like, well, I was going to say that's their way of making money, but there's no money in this society.
Right, and then again, the tourists are looking at her and Offglen as like a spectacle, and she's also looking at the women who are dressed in shorts and high heels, and they're kind of judging each other. And I thought that scene was interesting. And I also thought it relates to maybe that's how other women feel in other countries when American women are visiting, because there are still other countries where women have to cover their bodies. And I just thought it was an interesting scene, and also a bit confusing because they still like allow the tourists to come in. Maybe I'll read a little bit of it. They looked around, bright-eyed, cocking their heads to one side like robins. Their very cheerfulness aggressive, and I can't help staring. It's been a long time since I've seen skirts that short on women. The skirts reach just below the knee, and the legs come out from beneath them. Nearly naked in their thin stockings, blatant, the high-heeled shoes with their straps attached to the feet like delicate instruments of torture. The women teeter on their spiked feet as if on stilts, but off balance, their backs arched at the waist, thrusting the buttocks out. Their heads are uncovered, and their hair, too, is exposed in all its darkness and sexuality. They wear lipstick red, outlining the damp cavities of their mouths, like scrawls on a washroom wall of the time before. Then I think, I'm going to go down a little bit. Then I think I used to dress like that. That was freedom. Westernized, they used to call it. It's just interesting how now she views that in a different light. But also it's just, again, confusing that they still allow women into this society dressed like that. Is that, like, it's only mentioned here in the beginning, so I just wanted to note that.
Right. It could definitely be a plot hole, but it can also be a reminder to the handmaids of, look, this is not how you're supposed to dress and behave anymore. And you can even see how they were able to brainwash Offred, because now she's looking at these women who dress how she used to dress, and now she's even judging them.
Right, and even later on in the book, where the commander takes her out and wants her to get dressed up and put the makeup on, she feels silly doing that.
Right. And I know we had mentioned in the beginning of this episode we were going to correlate some parts to Fahrenheit 451. So we start to see all the parts of their former life. You know, they begin to strip those accesses away. So the commander shows Uffred that he has a magazine, and she is asking him where he got it from, because they had gone house to house searching and then creating bonfires to get rid of the books and the magazines, which we see in Fahrenheit 451, where reading was also outlawed. And it's interesting, right? Because she starts to think back to her former life where she would read these magazines at hotels and on planes and didn't give them a second thought or even really have any sort of significance to her. But now that it's that access to them is revoked, she's looking at the magazine in awe and desiring to hold it and to read it. So we see the similarity within this dystopian world and the dystopian world within Fahrenheit 451, where the significance of burning books and magazines to revoke access of reading and pleasure and entertainment. And I do feel like Margaret Atwood got inspired by 451 and wanted to incorporate that element into her dystopian world as well. I did want to point out another scene that related to Fahrenheit 451, and that's when she was singing a song. So on page 54, Offred is singing in her head, and she can't quite remember the words, but she mentions that such songs are not sung anymore in public, especially the ones that use words like free. They are considered too dangerous. They belong to outlawed sex. She's singing another song and she says, "This too is outlawed. I know it from an old cassette tape of my mother's. She had a scratchy, untrustworthy machine too that could still play such things. She used to put the tape on when her friends came over and they had a few drinks. I don't sing like this often. It makes my throat hurt." And it's interesting, she now, even just singing a little bit hurts her throat because she's not accustomed to it anymore. But we see how important it is for this society to strip books and magazines and songs away from them, because this all becomes a form of resistance and protest, and knowledge is power, which is, again, most of our the significance behind our book club is to retain that knowledge, because we know how important it is to educate ourselves and to continue reading.
Right, I was going to say that. Exactly one of the main reasons we decided to start the book club. And I also wanted to, another parallel to Fahrenheit was on page 19, when Offred meets up with Offglen to do the shopping. They exchange, I guess, pleasantries, and it says, "The war is going well, I hear," she says. "Praise be," I reply. "We've been sent good weather, which I receive with joy. They defeated more of the rebels since yesterday. Praise be, I say." And this conversation is very similar to the conversation that Guy's wife in Fahrenheit 451 was having with her friends, where there's no, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no weight or depth to the conversation. It's small talk. And again, it's about war, because of course war still exists in all of these dystopian worlds. And that's it. That's all that's said. And it's like, oh, the war is going well. And that's the extent of the conversation.
This relates to another big message we say: building a community, sharing ideas, building a bond, helping one another. This is what these dystopian worlds want to dismantle.
And again, the relationship between her and Offglen, as we mentioned earlier too, where they're both trying to decide, is this person safe? And we were talking about this in the last episode too, where you don't know if you can trust a stranger or if you should help a stranger, and we're not as willing to allow someone to come into our home or to offer the help because we think it's a trap and we have all this fear and we think the worst, like, oh, this person is not actually on my side. What else did you want to say about this book?
I think it's a great reminder to speak up. This was something else we spoke about in one of our last episodes, where were we talking about protests?
I know you and I had a conversation off camera about protests.
Yes. And, some people feel like protests are meaningless. And when we stop protesting and when we allow ourselves to be controlled more and more, this is just opening the gates to create such a society, right? So of course, fear, it's part of a human emotion. So this is what governments are going to rely on, and they're going to use tactics like violence and murder. And it's difficult because we're seeing it in our modern world, and we've mentioned this throughout the last 2 books we've read as well, where these issues aren't going away. Right? So as much as we wish we can stay in our home and with our things and pretend like everything's okay, and because it's not happening to us, then we're fine and we're safe. But we have to remember that when they come for one group, they come for the next group, and then they come for you, right? There's that quote, that famous quote. And there's a reason Mel and I keep gravitating towards political messages, and I know so many people are like, everything's political, and it's true, everything is political. We're seeing that in these dystopian worlds that we're reading, right? They're taking away certain accesses because they know how important and valuable it is.
Exactly. And I do believe protests could be meaningful if impact is made, and if we are actually building community and we are actually trying to find a way to get out of this structure. Making noise, I feel like, is not enough, especially if they don't care that we're making the noise. Like, oh yeah, let them have their little march, let them have their little protest, let them believe. Again, this false sense of hope and this false sense of freedom that we're given, where people go out and be like, I did something. And the sad truth is a lot of time nothing was done, or even when we do make progress, it gets reversed, as we've seen with Roe versus Wade being overturned, as we mentioned in our last episode about Kansas, how they're taking away the rights of the trans people, where they're making them put their IDs, the gender of their IDs, back to their birth gender. And again, all that protesting that we did to fight these things, they can just as easily take a bill and change it around.
Of course, and this is where I believe the resistance is woven This is where I believe the resistance is always going to be woven in our society, right? Like, this is where people need to make the decision of, okay, am I going to listen to this bill, or am I going to continue, or am I going to fight against it, right? Of course, with the trans right, it's a lot difficult, right? Because they need an ID, and we know they're trying to suppress them as much as they can, especially in Tennessee as well, where they're trying to pass a bill, I don't know if it got through, of revealing the trans community's medical records. And you have to realize, if this gets approved, then that's just opening access to your medical records being subjected to publication as well, right? Yeah. We have to care about, this is the message we keep saying, we have to care about the collective. It's not just about you and your identity and feeling like, oh, I'm safe because I'm this, I'm safe because I'm that.
Exactly. And again, even with the ICE raids, where they're kidnapping citizens and people who are trying to do it legally, and they're not even caring about any of the laws that are put in place. And that's why right now it's so scary, because that's where I feel like, yeah, I'm not saying not to protest, but I think we're at a point where we have to do more than just that.
One can hope that, ICE agents start to become the resistance, right? Or we see, and if they're trying to put forth a policy where you're discriminating against the group, I would hope that, spaces like schools become a safe space. Like, maybe these teachers don't need to conform to these policies that are being, imposed on them, and they do sneak in. It's difficult, right? Because we don't want them sneaking in like Christian values, and then they're over here bringing in the Bible. We're hoping that there are people throughout the society that are thinking of the collective and not choosing to conform to the propaganda and to the bills that are being passed. And I don't know, it's just, this is where people have to make the decision.
Of course, there's so much to talk about for this book and society as a whole. We are interested in watching the series that was made based on the book, so we will still be discussing The Handmaid's Tales in future episodes.
Absolutely. And one can only hope that the resistance will prevail.
Yes, and rise up. Resist, rebel, rise up.
Right. And release animosity you may have towards other groups that don't look like you. Reflect. Release, reflect, resist.
Renew, reuse, recycle. We also got to save the environment. All right. We do want to, before we go, we do want to announce our book for April. So for this month, we are steering away from the banned books for just this month. And we're also steering away from the dystopia. We are going to be reading the book Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. So I'm going to read the summary on the back of the book. When Michelle Zauner, the indie rock musician known as Japanese Breakfast, was in her mid-20s, working as a waitress and struggling to launch her music career in Philadelphia, she got a call that her mother was ill. She put her life on hold and flew home to Eugene, Oregon, to be with her mother through the final excruciating months of her battle with cancer. This is Zauner's searingly candid coming-of-age story of growing apart from and then back together with her Korean identity, and of forging her own path in the wake of a devastating loss. With humor and heart, she tells of growing up Asian American, straining to meet her mother's expectations, moving across the country, and returning home to reckon with grief. And through it all, she savors the unexpected solace of weekly trips to her favorite Asian grocery store. Vivacious and plain-spoken, lyrical and honest, Crying in H Mart is an unflinching, powerful story of family, food, grief, and love. And of course, as we've mentioned before, we want to read books from all cultures and backgrounds. And we also can relate to the story because Danny and I lost our dad 6 years ago. He passed away from cancer. And I felt as though we could relate to a lot of aspects in this story with grief. And even though this is about her relationship with her mother, I feel like that's another thing Danny and I can relate to. And then once again, learning through other cultures and backgrounds as well.
Absolutely. I'm sure this book will make us cry, but I feel like it can also help us navigate grief. I'm sure this will be another book where we learn a lot and I hope you all are able to read along with us. Please go get your copy if you can. This is our book for the month of April. So read along with us. We may end up releasing a list of our upcoming books for the rest of our book club. We're still deciding.
Maybe at least for the next few months ahead, maybe so people can get their copies and plan ahead. Also, when we do, should we tell them when we do?
Yes, Nala's here.
Okay, girl, give us 5 minutes. So when we do the review for this book, Danny and I thought it would be a cool idea to go to H Mart and do a little mukbang before the review or during the review. And interestingly enough, mukbangs originate from South Korea, which is where this author is from. And maybe she'll mention some foods in there that we'll decide to buy, or maybe we'll just get our own snacks. We'll see. But I thought that would be a cute idea for the review.
Thank you all so much for watching. We will see you in the next episode.
Bye.